Jason had always believed in their love. Amanda was everything to him. His partner, his confidant, his anchor. But the little things started to erode his confidence. Late nights at work, deleted messages, her tense smile. These weren't just coincidences. And then, he found a hotel room key in her bag. When? Why? With whom? Jason felt anger and pain surging through him. But he didn't confront her. No, he chose to play. To play a game where every move she made, every glance, would be under his watchful eye. What would he discover? And could he handle the truth? Betrayal in its worst form. Jason decided to play her game. But how will it end? I always thought my life was perfect, Jason mused, staring at the silvery reflection of the moon in his glass of whiskey. He was a successful attorney, owned a luxurious house in the suburbs of New York, and had a charming wife, Amanda, who, he believed, loved him more than anything. But that night, something changed. Jason always trusted his intuition. He felt that Amanda had been acting strangely over the past few weeks. Her smile had become more forced, she stayed late at work more often, and her phone was constantly in her hands. At first, Jason dismissed his doubts, but then he found a small clue, a receipt from an expensive restaurant they had never been to together. His heart sank with foreboding, but his mind demanded facts. On Friday, when Amanda said she had to stay late for a meeting, Jason decided to act. He enlisted the help of an old friend and private detective, Mark, to uncover the truth. The next day, Mark handed Jason photos. In them, Amanda was sitting at a table in that very restaurant, laughing with a man Jason didn't recognize. Their embraces, the glances they exchanged, there was no mistaking it for anything else. Jason felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over him, but he didn't rush to confront her. His fury turned into a plan. If Amanda had so easily destroyed their life, he would make her feel the same pain. Jason sat in his office, holding the very photo that had changed his life forever. Instead of tearing it up or giving in to rage, he smiled. Not a smile of joy, but one that promised a storm. His plan began to take shape, and he knew that rushing would ruin everything. That evening, when Amanda returned home, her eyes sparkled as if nothing had happened. She kissed Jason on the cheek and quickly began talking about her tough day at work. Jason played his role masterfully. He listened, nodded, and even offered her a glass of wine. "You're amazing, Amanda," he said, watching as she settled onto the couch. "I know how hard you work. I'm so lucky to have you." A shadow of unease crossed her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. Jason noticed and realized that her game continued. He decided it was time to start his own. The next day, Jason suggested having dinner with Amanda at the very restaurant where she had recently been with the stranger. She hesitated for a moment before replying, "Oh, that sounds great, but I think I have a lot of work this week. Maybe on the weekend?" "Sure," Jason replied easily, "but I just wanted to celebrate our love. Nothing special." Her smile was strained, and Jason sensed that she was hiding something again. Over the next few days, he began acting with double caution. On Amanda's phone, he found messages from the same man, Greg. The tone was innocent, but the words hinted at more, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," and "looking forward to your smile." He didn't respond right away. Instead, Jason made copies of the messages and began keeping his own journal, recording every detail he learned about their meetings. He wasn't in a hurry. He wanted to dismantle her illusion slowly, methodically. One evening, Jason proposed inviting a few friends over for dinner. Amanda was thrilled with the idea, but in reality, it was another step in his plan. Among the guests was Mark, the detective who had helped him gather evidence. Mark acted appropriately, but there was a barely noticeable tension between him and Amanda when Jason casually mentioned, "Amanda, do you remember that guy who worked with Mark? Someone named Greg, I think?" She almost dropped her glass, but quickly recovered. "No, I don't remember. You must be mistaken." "Maybe," Jason replied, keeping his mask firmly in place. That moment confirmed his suspicions. Later that night, when Amanda was asleep, Jason took her phone. The messages from Greg were more personal this time. "I dream of you every minute, and that meeting was perfect." He took more screenshots and returned the phone to its place. He was setting a trap. A few days later, Jason invited Amanda to dinner at a new restaurant. They talked and laughed as they used to, but every word he spoke was calculated. He did everything to make her believe their relationship was on the upswing. But when they returned home, Jason quietly approached her and said, "Amanda, there's something you need to know. I know about Greg." Her face turned as pale as a snowstorm, but she didn't confess immediately. "Greg? Who's that?" Amanda remained silent, but her expression gave everything away. Jason didn't press for an answer. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her in shock. Amanda stood in the doorway of the bedroom, clutching the hem of her sweater. Her face was pale, but her eyes glistened with tears she was holding back. Jason sat at the edge of the bed, holding his phone. The screenshots of her chats with Greg, saved in his memory, felt sharper than knives. "Jason," she started softly, "it's not what you think. Please, let me explain." "Oh, I'm sure it's exactly what I think." His voice was cold as ice. "Do you want to tell me it's all a fabrication? That these messages with Greg are just a joke?" She took a step forward, then another, until she stood in front of him. Her hand reached out to touch his shoulder, but he flinched, making her freeze. "Jason," she spoke again, this time more insistently, it was a mistake. I was confused. You're always at work, always busy. I started to feel lonely, but it didn't mean anything. I swear." He stood up so abruptly that she took a step back. "Lonely?" he snapped. "You have everything anyone could ever imagine. A luxurious house, a good life, a loving husband. And you call that loneliness? What about me, Amanda? Did you think about how I'd feel seeing this?" She began to cry, this time openly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. It was foolish. I'm sorry, Jason. I'll do anything to fix this. Just don't leave me." He stared at her, saying nothing. His silence was unbearable. Amanda fell to her knees, clutching his hands. "Please," she whispered, "give me a chance. I'll swear on anything that it won't happen again." Jason felt his anger subsiding, but not completely. In its place, a cold calculation began to take root. He pretended to hesitate. "Amanda," he said at last, "maybe I can forgive you, but it won't be easy. You'll have to prove to me that I can trust you again." Hope flickered in her eyes. She nodded without hesitation. "I'll do whatever you say," she promised. Jason gently lifted her to her feet and looked directly into her eyes. "All right, then let's start small. You'll cut all ties with Greg. I want to see you delete his number and block him right now." Amanda hurriedly grabbed her phone and complied with his demand. But Jason knew this wasn't enough. He saw her nervousness, her fear, and it only fueled his desire to continue. That night, after Amanda fell asleep, Jason began working on the next step of his plan. He knew that betrayal couldn't go unpunished, and while she begged for forgiveness, he wanted her to feel the same pain he had felt. He started contemplating how to use Greg to deliver an even more crushing blow. If Amanda thought this would end with a simple reconciliation scene, she was gravely mistaken. Jason knew the real revenge was just beginning. Saturday evening was quiet, even cozy. Amanda sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, a glass of wine in her hand. Jason appeared relaxed, but there was a cold determination in his eyes. He chose this evening for his next move. "Love, how about we spend tomorrow evening at our favorite restaurant?" he asked, as if nothing had happened between them. Amanda nodded, trying to appear calm. "Of course, that sounds wonderful," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. Jason raised his glass to hide his smile. He knew it would be hard for her to resist his plan, especially after all his efforts toward reconciliation. But it was this trust that would become the key to his scheme. The next evening, they arrived at the restaurant. Amanda looked stunning. Her evening gown accentuated her graceful figure, and diamond pins sparkled in her hair. Jason admired her, but in his mind, the game was already underway. The hostess greeted them and led them to a cozy table by the window. Amanda believed it was just another romantic dinner, but Jason knew the night would end differently. Midway through dinner, as they reminisced about the early days of their relationship, Jason feigned a sudden thought. "By the way, Amanda, I invited a surprise guest. I hope you don't mind." She tensed but tried not to show it. Oh, and who might that be? There he is, Jason said, glancing over her shoulder. Amanda slowly turned around. Her face changed the moment she saw Greg. He was walking toward their table with a faint smile, but confusion was written all over his face. Hi, Greg said, stopping near them. I didn't expect to see you here, Amanda. Greg, her voice trembled. What are you doing here? Jason, savoring her reaction, feigned surprise. Oh, you two know each other? That's incredible. Greg is an old friend of mine. We ran into each other a few days ago and decided to have dinner together. I had no idea you were already acquainted. Amanda was at a loss for words, and Greg looked as if he was searching for a way to disappear. But Jason didn't let them escape the moment. Have a seat, Greg. This is going to be an interesting dinner, he said, smiling with confidence. Greg sat down slowly. Amanda was as pale as snow. Jason reveled in the tense atmosphere. He knew this moment was the climax of his plan. So, tell me, how did you two meet? Jason asked, holding his wine glass. Amanda quickly responded, it was at one of the conferences. We just exchanged a few words. Really? Jason raised his tone. Interesting, because I heard your meetings were a bit more frequent. Greg couldn't handle the tension any longer. Look, Jason, it was a mistake. We didn't mean to hurt you. Amanda flinched, and Jason raised his eyebrows. A mistake, he repeated. So, it really was what I think it was? Amanda could no longer hold back her tears. Jason, please, let me explain. Explain? You've already said everything. Your actions speak louder than any words. He stood up, tossing his napkin onto the table. His gaze stopped on Greg. I thought you were my friend, but now I see who you really are. Jason walked away, leaving them in complete shock. But he knew this was only the beginning. His next move would be even more devastating. Jason stood on the balcony of his office, inhaling the cold night air. His mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts. The events of the previous night had been an emotional explosion, but they gave him more than just satisfaction. They gave him a new tool for his plan. He knew Greg was now the key to exposing Amanda even further. Early the next morning, he called Greg. We need to meet, Jason said coldly. Are you serious? After everything? Greg's voice was tense. I'm more serious than ever. I have a proposal you can't refuse. Greg fell silent for a few seconds, then sighed. Fine. Where and when? They met at a small bar on the outskirts of the city. Greg looked nervous, but tried to maintain his composure. Jason, on the other hand, exuded calm, which only heightened the tension. Why am I here? Greg asked as the waiter brought him a glass of whiskey. You know why. You betrayed me, but this isn't over yet. Now you have a chance to make it right, Jason said, leaning closer. We both know you care about Amanda, and that's your weakness, but you can use it to your advantage. Greg smiled faintly, though his eyes remained serious. What are you suggesting? We both want to put her in her place. She's playing us both, and I'm not going to let her walk away unscathed. I want you to help me expose her completely. Greg pondered this. His hands gripped the glass so tightly it seemed ready to shatter. Finally, he spoke. And what do you get out of this? Justice. And the satisfaction of knowing she'll never be able to manipulate others the way she did with us. And how do you plan to do that? Jason smiled. She has secrets you can't even imagine. I know where to find them, but I need someone who can get closer to her than I can. The following weeks were tense. Jason and Greg worked together, carefully planning every step. Greg began playing the role of a repentant man in front of Amanda, gradually earning her trust. She started to believe their affair could be rekindled. Meanwhile, Jason monitored their every move, using hidden cameras and microphones. One day, Greg returned with crucial evidence, Amanda's old laptop. It contained emails, photos, and even financial records that revealed even darker secrets. Jason felt the pieces of his plan finally coming together. The final stage of their plan began when Jason organized a big party at his house. He invited all their friends, and even some of Amanda's colleagues. She had no idea it was all part of a grand trap. The climax of the evening came when Jason raised a toast and invited Amanda to the stage. My dear, I want to show everyone what an incredible woman you are, he said, holding a remote for the projector. Photos and videos from her laptop appeared on the screen behind them. The guests froze. Amanda turned pale, her hands trembling. "What is this?" she asked, trying to mask her panic. "It's the truth you've been hiding for so long," Jason replied. "And now everyone knows who you really are." Jason stood before the screen, savoring every second of his victory. The room was filled with stunned silence, broken only by the occasional gasp from the guests. Amanda looked shattered. Her eyes darted around, searching for an explanation, while her hands barely held her glass. Jason felt he had reached his peak, but at that very moment, the game changed. Greg suddenly stood up, tossing his napkin onto the table. All eyes turned to him. His face, previously expressing guilt and submission, now shone with confidence. "Jason," he began calmly, but his voice was firm, "you think you've won? But you have no idea how wrong you are." The room grew tense. Jason tilted his head, trying to understand what was happening. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice laced with coldness. Greg smiled and addressed the guests. "He's only shown you one side of the story, but I think it's time to tell the truth." Amanda looked confused but quickly caught on to his play. "Yes, Greg is right," she exclaimed. "Jason wants to make me look like a monster, but he's the one who's been manipulating both of us all along." Jason felt the ground slipping from beneath him. "What is this theatrical performance?" he thought, but his face remained impassive. "Amanda," he said, taking a step forward, "do you really want everyone to believe that I—" "Yes," she interrupted. "You hired Greg to blackmail me. You forced him to play this game. But we figured out your plan." The guests began murmuring, and Jason felt the situation slipping out of his control. Greg approached Amanda and took her hand. The gesture was simple yet so telling. "Jason, you thought you could use me," Greg said, his voice defiant. "But I won't be your pawn." Jason laughed, dryly and bitterly. "Do you two seriously think this will change anything?" he asked. "Do you really think everyone here will believe you?" Amanda stepped forward, looking Jason straight in the eye. "You forgot that I know your secrets too," she said. "Your financial schemes. Your affairs. Do you want everyone to see those as well?" Those words made Jason step back. He realized the game had reached a new level, and now he had to fight on two fronts. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains, but the room was thick with tension. Amanda sat on the edge of the couch, clutching a cup of coffee. Across from her, in an armchair, sat Greg. His face reflected a complicated mix of emotions: fear, determination, and anger. Between them lay a small stack of documents they had been compiling over the past few days. "So, we have everything," Amanda said quietly, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. "The messages, the financial schemes, even those photos with his secretary." "But this isn't the end," Greg interrupted her. "Jason didn't get to where he is by accident. He's always one step ahead. If we make a mistake, he'll destroy us." Amanda sighed and set her cup down on the table. "We can't wait, Greg. We have a chance to stop him before he makes his next move." Greg nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. He knew Jason was a dangerous opponent, and every move they made had to be flawless. Meanwhile, Jason was in his office, reviewing a few documents his lawyers had prepared for him. His instincts told him Amanda and Greg wouldn't leave things as they were. He knew their encounter at the restaurant was just the beginning of a new game. Jason pressed a button on his phone to summon his assistant. "Come in, and bring me the reports we got on Greg last week." The assistant quickly entered, carrying a folder filled with detailed files. Jason opened it and began flipping through the pages. "So, Greg, you want to play against me? Let's see how long you last," he murmured, turning the pages. That evening, Amanda and Greg decided to act. They gathered all the evidence and prepared an anonymous letter for several journalists. Their goal wasn't just to ruin Jason, but to do it publicly. They knew his reputation was his most valuable asset. "Greg, are you sure this is the right path?" Amanda asked as they finished their final preparations. "It's the only path, Amanda. If we don't stop him now, he'll destroy both of us." The next day, the news exploded. Headlines screamed about Jason's financial schemes, his connections with powerful figures, and even hints of personal scandals. Chaos reigned in his office. His phone rang incessantly, and assistants rushed around with documents, trying to find a way out. But Jason remained calm. He sat in his chair, watching the news unfold on his computer screen. "Do you really think this will stop me?" he whispered, smiling. "You don't even realize you've just signed your own death warrant." He pressed a few keys on his keyboard and opened an email. Among dozens of messages was one from his private investigator. Inside were pieces of evidence that completely flipped the situation. The morning began unexpectedly quiet. Sunlight streamed into Jason's office, but determination burned in his eyes. He held printed emails, bank statements, and photos the private investigator had obtained about Amanda and Greg. These documents were the key to turning the game around. Jason reviewed every line, every piece of evidence. He knew today would be decisive. The evening talk show hosted by renowned journalist Michael Drake was at its peak when Jason entered the studio. Behind the scenes, his lawyers and PR team were already hard at work. They had a clear plan, not just to defend his name, but to utterly destroy Amanda and Greg's reputations. During a commercial break, Michael approached Jason. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "This could get very messy." Jason simply smiled. "Michael, I didn't make this mess. I'm just cleaning it up." The show began. Jason sat in the studio, calm and confident. Michael introduced him as a successful businessman caught in the center of a scandal. For the first few minutes, they discussed the attacks on his reputation and how the media had misinterpreted events. Then Jason played his trump card. "Michael," he began, "let me show you who's really behind these attempts to destroy me." The screen behind them lit up with photos of Greg handing documents to Amanda. Then came screenshots of their messages, where they discussed manipulating the media. But the real climax was the bank records. It was revealed that Amanda had been transferring money from Jason's accounts to a secret account managed by Greg. Michael and the audience were stunned. "Are you saying that your wife and her lover not only betrayed you but also stole your money?" Michael asked. "Exactly," Jason replied. "They thought I would stay silent, but I won't anymore." Meanwhile, Amanda and Greg were watching the show at home. Amanda nervously bit her lip while Greg clenched his fists. "We have to do something," she exclaimed. "If he keeps going, we'll lose everything." "Calm down," Greg said, though his voice lacked confidence. "We still have cards to play." "What cards?" she snapped. Greg remained silent. His eyes drifted to the folder lying on the table. Inside were records that could deal a heavy blow to Jason, but using them could make things even worse. After the show, Jason returned home. He knew he had made the first move, but the game wasn't over yet. His phone lit up with a new message from an unknown number. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." The night was quiet, but the atmosphere in Greg's apartment was tense to the breaking point. Amanda paced the room, clutching her phone. On the table in front of them lay a black flash drive. Small, but it could become a weapon against Jason. "We have to be careful," Greg whispered, staring at the flash drive as if it were a ticking time bomb. "If this gets out of control, they'll come for us." "We don't have a choice," Amanda replied. "He's already backed us into a corner. If we do nothing, it's over for us." Greg sighed and carefully picked up the flash drive. It contained records that incriminated Jason, evidence of his ties to corrupt officials, hidden payments, and even private videos that could ruin his career. "We need to make sure this ends up in the right hands," he said, inserting the flash drive into his laptop. "I know a journalist who will want to use this." Amanda leaned in closer, her expression serious. "Are you sure we can trust him? That he won't sell us out to Jason?" Greg met her gaze. "It's a risk, but we don't have another choice." Across town, Jason sat in his office. He could feel something brewing. His instincts had never failed him. He opened his laptop and reviewed reports from his investigator. Every move Amanda and Greg had made was documented, but this time, something had slipped through. His phone rang. It was one of his contacts in the police department. "Jason," the voice on the other end sounded tense. "I have some information that might interest you." Amanda and Greg met with a journalist. "I think they're planning something big." Jason smiled, though his eyes remained cold. "Thanks for the tip. I'll take care of it." The next day, Greg and Amanda met the journalist in a small cafe. They handed him the flash drive, briefly explaining its contents. The journalist looked intrigued, but there was a hint of cunning in his eyes. "If this is what you say it is, it's going to be explosive," he said. "But you understand Jason won't let this slide?" "We're ready," Amanda replied firmly. That evening, Jason entered his living room, where his team of lawyers and private investigators were already waiting. On the large screen, a video played showing Amanda and Greg handing the flash drive to the journalist in the cafe. "They're playing a dangerous game," Jason said, "but they don't even realize I know all their moves." He raised a glass of whiskey and looked at his team. "Tomorrow, we'll strike a blow they'll never forget." The next morning, the news exploded. But instead of exposing Jason, every channel reported on Greg and Amanda. They were portrayed as manipulators attempting to blackmail a prominent businessman. The leaked information was so detailed that it left no room for doubt. Amanda stared at the television screen in horror. Greg, sitting beside her, was silent, but his face was pale. "How did this happen?" she whispered. "He outplayed us," Greg replied. "He knew about our meeting with the journalist." At that moment, their phone rang. Amanda picked it up, and a familiar, cold voice came through on the other end. "You wanted to play against me? Now watch as I destroy you both." Amanda nervously paced the room, packing a suitcase. Her fingers trembled as she folded clothes, documents, and anything else that seemed important. Greg stood by the window, watching the street intently. He held a phone in his hand, ready for the call that would set their escape plan in motion. "We have to move faster," he said, his eyes fixed on the street. "Jason already knows we're trying to disappear. He won't stop." "I know," Amanda replied, trying to suppress the panic in her voice. "But if we rush, he'll definitely find us." Greg turned to her, his gaze cold and tense. "He's already put us on a wanted list. I got the notification. The police are checking all airports and train stations." Amanda collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "This is the end, Greg. We've lost." "No, not yet," he said, kneeling in front of her. "We can still get out if we play this smart. I know someone who can help us. They'll arrange new documents and get us out of the country." Meanwhile, Jason sat in his office, staring at a photograph taken by his detective. In it, Amanda and Greg were seated in a cafe, their faces filled with tension. He took a sip of whiskey and pressed the intercom button. "What do you have on them?" he asked. "They've been placed on an international watch list," the voice on the other end replied. "Their accounts are frozen. We've also set up surveillance on their contacts." "Good. But I want them to feel every second of this. Don't let them slip away." Amanda and Greg left their apartment late at night. They changed their clothes to remain inconspicuous and headed to an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. There, a man with a suitcase was waiting for them. "These are your new documents," he said, handing them fake passports. "But there's a problem. Jason has already activated his network. You're running out of time." Greg clenched his teeth, glancing at Amanda. "We'll make it. We have to." They climbed into an old van and headed toward the border. The road was dark and quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. "What if he finds us even there?" Amanda whispered. "He won't," Greg replied. "We'll disappear." But their hopes were dashed when the van suddenly came to a stop. Ahead, several police cars with flashing lights blocked the road. Amanda felt her heart sink. "This is it," she whispered. Greg reached for the door, but it was too late. Police surrounded them within seconds. "Did you really think you could escape?" Jason's familiar voice came from one of the cars. He stepped out and walked closer, smiling. "You forgot who you're dealing with." Amanda sat in a dimly lit interrogation room, her elbows resting on the metal table. The lamp above her flickered, casting shadows on the walls. Her hands trembled, though she tried to appear calm. She knew the situation was catastrophic, but a plan was already forming in her mind. The door opened, and Jason entered the room. His face was cold, his eyes filled with the same fury Amanda had only seen once before, on the night he discovered her betrayal. "Well, Amanda," he said, sitting across from her, "how does it feel to be on the other side of the game?" Amanda lifted her head, trying to meet his gaze. Her voice was weak but steady. "Jason, you need to hear me out." "Hear you out?" He laughed dryly. "I gave you more than anyone else ever would, and you chose betrayal. Do you think I'll believe your excuses now?" "It was a mistake," she replied quickly. "But you have to understand, I wasn't just thinking about myself. I was afraid of losing everything." Jason leaned forward, his face inches from hers. "And you decided to lie to me? Steal my money? Work with someone I once called a friend?" "Greg manipulated me," she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. "He made me believe it was the only way to save myself." "Save yourself from what?" His voice was sharp. "Your own greed." She fell silent, carefully considering her next words. She needed to find a way to reach his heart, even if it was encased in ice. "Jason, I've done terrible things. But you need to understand, I still love you. I've always loved you." He laughed again, this time bitterly. "Love? Is this how you show your love?" "Give me a chance to fix this," she begged. "I'll do anything to prove my loyalty to you. Just don't push me away." Jason remained silent for several minutes, his face betraying no emotion. Finally, he stood up. "Fine, Amanda. I'll give you a chance. But you need to understand, if you betray me again, I won't be merciful this time." Her heart stopped. She nodded, her eyes fixed on his. "I promise, Jason. I won't let you down." He leaned closer to her, his voice quiet but menacing. "I'm already working on something, and you're going to be a part of it. So be ready to play by my rules." Amanda stood in Jason's large office, nervously wringing her hands. After their last conversation, she decided to comply. Her choice was driven by fear and the faint hope that she could regain his trust, though deep down, she doubted his true intentions. "Sit," Jason said without looking up from his computer screen. His voice was calm, but every word echoed with menace. Amanda slowly lowered herself into the chair across from his desk. Her heart was racing, her mind spinning with thoughts of how to prove her loyalty. "You understand you're playing by my rules now?" he asked, finally lifting his cold gaze to meet hers. "Yes," she replied softly. "I'll do whatever you say." Jason smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "Good, because the next move will be decisive. And if you fail me—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his look conveyed more than words ever could. While Amanda struggled to adapt to her new position, Greg refused to leave her alone. He began sending her messages, which started neutral but became increasingly insistent over time. He demanded a meeting. One evening, while Jason was busy with his affairs, Amanda quietly left the house and went to meet Greg at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Greg was already waiting for her, his face tense but determined. "I knew you'd come," he said as she sat across from him. "Greg, this is dangerous. If Jason finds out—" "He already knows," Greg interrupted her. "Do you think you can escape his notice? But that doesn't matter. I have a plan, and this time, we'll win." Amanda sighed, pressing her fingers to her temples. "No, Greg. I can't anymore. He's got everything under control. I don't have the strength to fight. Listen to me." His voice turned harsher. "I have evidence that can destroy him. All I need is your help. We can do this together." She hesitated. Her fear of Jason clashed with her hatred for his manipulations. But could she trust Greg after everything that had happened? "I'll think about it," she said finally, standing up. Greg grabbed her hand. "You don't have much time, Amanda. If we don't act now, he'll destroy us both." When she returned home, Jason was already waiting for her. His face was stone cold, and he held her phone in his hand. "You thought you could hide something from me?" he asked, throwing the phone onto the table. Amanda felt her heart clench with fear. "Jason, I just what? Met with Greg? You thought I wouldn't find out?" His voice was sharp, but he remained in control. "He said he has evidence against you. I don't know if it's true, but I couldn't ignore it." Jason stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You're making a choice, Amanda. Either you're with me, or you're against me. But remember this. If you betray me again, the consequences will be irreversible." Amanda woke up in the luxurious bedroom, but even the silk sheets couldn't mask her anxiety. The large window overlooked the city waking under the rays of the morning sun, but she felt as though her life remained shrouded in darkness. From the moment Jason told her to play by his rules, she felt she had lost control. A knock at the door broke her thoughts, and Jason entered. He looked impeccable. His black suit fit perfectly, and his cold gaze radiated a confidence that frightened her. "You look better than yesterday," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I hope you're ready for today. What are you planning?" Amanda asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing too complicated," he replied, leaning closer. "I just want you by my side. You know how important that is to me." His words sounded almost affectionate, but Amanda felt the hidden threat beneath them. She knew he had her in his grip and wouldn't let go. Their day began with a meeting with investors. Jason embodied success as he presented his new project. Amanda sat beside him, smiling and playing the role of the perfect wife. But inside, she was seething. Every glance, every touch from him reminded her that she was only there because he wanted her to be. On the drive home, they sat in silence until Amanda couldn't take it anymore. "How long are you going to keep me in this prison?" she asked, breaking the silence. Jason looked at her with mild surprise before smiling. "Prison? Amanda, you made your choice. I'm simply giving you the opportunity to fix your mistakes." "This isn't fixing anything. This is manipulation," she replied, her voice growing firmer. "Maybe, but I've learned one thing. If you want to achieve your goals, you need to play carefully," he said. "And by the way, we have an important evening tomorrow. Be prepared." The next evening, they attended a charity gala hosted by one of the city's largest corporations. Amanda understood that this wasn't just an event, it was part of Jason's game. She noticed how easily he charmed influential people, winning their trust. But what struck her most was how he used her presence to bolster his image. "Do you see how they look at you?" he whispered in her ear. "You're my greatest asset, Amanda, and I won't let you destroy it." Her frustration grew, but she held it in. She knew that any misstep could be turned against her. However, that night, when they returned home, she couldn't hold back. "Jason, I can't live like this anymore," she exclaimed. "This isn't a life. It's a performance where I'm just your puppet." He stepped closer, looking directly into her eyes. "You want to know what a real performance is?" His voice was quiet but piercing. "It's when someone plays their role so well that they forget who they really are. And you've long since lost yourself." Late at night, Amanda found herself alone in his study. She discovered his notebook and began flipping through the pages. It contained names, dates, and plans, everything that confirmed his manipulations. Her heart pounded as she realized the extent of his schemes. But among the notes, she found something unexpected, a mention of a meeting with someone whose name she recognized. It was Greg. Amanda sat in the dimly lit room, with only the faint glow of a lamp illuminating Jason's face. He stood before her, holding his notebook, the symbol of his power, control, and manipulation. She felt like a bird in a cage, and every attempt to escape only pulled her deeper into his game. "You thought you could deceive me?" His voice was quiet, but that made it even more terrifying. "You thought you could use what I left in plain sight to take back control? I just wanted to understand." Amanda began, but he raised his hand, silencing her. "Understanding is for the weak. You had a chance. You could have been part of my game, but you decided to try to play against me." Amanda glanced at the notebook. It held information that could destroy Jason, but now he knew she had tried to use it. She realized she had made a fatal mistake. "What do you want from me?" Her voice was quiet, almost broken. Jason leaned in closer, his face just inches from hers. "Complete loyalty," he said. "You will do everything I say. You will be part of every plan I make, and you will never take another step without my permission." Amanda felt her heart tighten. She understood she had lost her freedom, but could she find a way to get it back? "And if I agree?" she asked. Jason smiled, but there was no joy in his smile. "If you agree, you will live. You can stay by my side. But if you ever decide to go against me again..." He paused, making it clear the consequences would be dire. The following weeks became a trial for Amanda. She followed Jason's every instruction without question. She accompanied him to meetings, playing the role of the perfect wife and partner. But every moment of her new life was filled with fear and hatred. One day, Jason prepared her for an important meeting with a group of investors. He gave her a speech to rehearse. But during the meeting, Amanda unexpectedly changed her tone. "I want to tell you that there's only one person in this company who truly deserves your trust," she said, looking directly at Jason. "And that person is sitting in front of you. Jason has always known how to make the right decisions, and I'm glad to be part of his team." It was her first attempt to earn a sliver of his trust. But even after that speech, she didn't feel safe. The evening ended quietly. Jason invited Amanda into his office. "You did well today," he said, sitting behind his desk. "Perhaps you can still prove your loyalty." "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Just trust me." His voice was almost gentle. "Trust me and don't ask questions. That's the only condition." Amanda realized the choice had been made for her. She remained a part of his game, but a flicker of hope still burned in her eyes. Perhaps one day she would find a way to escape this cycle. But could she break the rules Jason had set and reclaim her freedom? What do you imagine as Amanda's next steps?